So today we're picking up in the fourth part what we have been looking at of current events and looking at questions of is the Sunday law even possible? What's Christian nationalism and so forth. Now, of course, next week we will not be continuing on due to being at Leone, but the week following, that'd be the culmination. We'll look at Project 2025, what it is and what it is not, and seek to maybe demystify some pieces there. But today we're going to start it back again with When Dragons Speak. And of course, our basis we're looking at today is from Revelation, the 13th chapter. And the main emphasis, of course, on the latter portions of that chapter. And starting in one of the pieces we want to remind us of like the rise of Christian nationalism as such, and how we have seen it in this country. It is not something that is new. It's something that has been apart for a while and anchoring us in the general terminology. Think of Christian nationalism as just like the two compound terms that it represents. One like Christian and the other one's like for the nation. So that those who espouse the views or adherents of Christian nationalism believe that as Christians, then the nation's laws should reflect the beliefs of Christians, so that it's okay then to have like religious influence in its laws and such. So that is like the basic one of the basic tenets of Christian nationalism, that as a Christian, the nation's laws should reflect itself through its legal systems. And of course, in particular, as we talk about America, we talk about Christian nationalism in America. Those who adhere to it believe that America is a Christian nation. Shouldn't say was, but is a Christian nation. And it was founded upon the principles of Judeo-Christianity. As a result, its law should then reflect that. So it should be reflective of that. So from the 1600s all the way down, it should be reflective of that. And so that they are desirous of making sure that religion has a more prevalent view or prominent view. It is not as though this group has grown and grows from its infancy, but rather it has grown in its influence. So it is not as though it's just blowing out at the seams of just adherence, but its influence has continued to grow in terms of those who adhere to it, whether they are certain legislators or people who are influential in terms of power in America. But they see it as a part of being able to bring America under the principles of the Bible. Now, again, you might say, well, as a Christian, shouldn't our laws reflect Christian values? Shouldn't they emphasize those things? And again, there's nothing wrong with a law emphasizing upstanding values and virtues. However, it is an issue, though, when we seek to put religious twists in laws to be able to bring adherence to. And so it's always a principle of separation of church and state. Now, in Revelation chapter 13, when it talks about this lamb-like beast speaking, it says he opened his mouth and he spake as a dragon. This is Revelation chapter 13. Now, in the book of Revelation, there are a couple of times we see a dragon brought to view. And when we focus on those times that the dragon is brought to view, it's again based on symbolisms. Like Revelation is really dealing with symbols of beast and kingdoms and the lamb and this conflict between good and evil, all those things being carried out. Like the high-arching thing of Revelation is, again, that struggle between good and evil and how it plays out through the ages, the culminating in the very last conflagration of the last days. In it, though, part of it in Revelation 13, it says that this beast came up out of the earth. And we learned last week that a beast is a symbol of a populated area. And so this beast that would rise up in the earth was a symbol of a unpopulated area or a sparsely populated region. And in particular, when we look at it then geographically on the map, we know that most of the action of Daniel 2 and 7 and so forth, that took place over in what we call the Old World. It took place in the region of the Middle East. Then when we move over to the shift in Revelation, it's what's taking place like in the New World. So we have like this contrast between what was in the Old World between what is taking place in the New World. We call the New World, of course, America. This lamb-like beast comes up out of the earth, and he had two horns, and the two horns were again a symbol of power. It's a symbol of like Protestantism and republicanism, meaning not a Republican form, not a Republican or versus democratic society, but the reality that the nation would be a nation that would be governed by its people. The people would have like this principle of separation of church and state. So no popes, no kings. We would have like a separation of the two. Now it's interesting, of course, that you see a lot of protests that have taken place in the last 7 months or so, and those protests have been called like no king rallies. And the idea behind it is that many feel that the president is making, consolidating power within the executive branch and overstepping boundaries, overstepping authorities, and people are a little concerned because they feel we don't have kings. So you see some of these pieces there in that respect. And again, going to Revelation, Revelation is dictating or indicating that there be these two horns, separation of church and the separation of state. Now, America does not have a history of separation of church and state. When you look at America's infancy all the way through, it's not until like you get into like the 1900s, really you start seeing more of an emphasis of separation of church and state in the local level. So again, you have to go back to some of the previous studies that we've had, but we see that when the nation in the 1600s, the colonies, you had churches had a very high influence in the state life. If people were going to be elected to office, they were generally of the persuasion of the adherents. And the colonies were separated between those that were Catholic, those that were Anglican, those that were friendly to Baptists, those that were Puritan. You have this break in it. So again, if you were looking on a map and you wanted to come from Europe to the New World, chances were that you would pick a colony that would not only be amenable and open to you being able to have livelihood, but you want to make sure that you could go somewhere that the religious beliefs were similar. Because if you were a Protestant and you landed in Catholic Maryland, you would probably have some challenges and issues. And if you were a Catholic and you landed in Anglican Virginia, you're going to probably have some issues. And so when the framers began to write the Declaration of Independence and the articles that were there in the amendments, one of the ones that, not the first ones, but one of the ones that was first ratified, was that there would be this no established religion. Right? So again, freedom of religion also means freedom from religion. The church would not make its incursions upon the state would not make its incursions upon the church. The two would be completely separate institutions. And by and large, the courts have recently, in the last 100 or so years especially, have tried to bring that into being so that a person can have whatever religious beliefs they want as long as those religious beliefs do not inflict harm or damage, etc., on someone else's person. That's typically like a very high-level overview, some more nuances to it, but if you believe X, it's fine to believe X, and that belief is protected. You cannot then, though, if your religion says, as part of our indoctrination, I need to go out and to shoot 5 people. Well, then you run afoul, so that can't be held, that could be your religious belief, but it can't be a religious belief that is carried out in function and practice as such. Because again, now we're bordering over. But essentially the church is separate from the state was separate from the church. Now, Revelation chapter 12, it speaks about the dragon. So one of the instances, it says that the dragon is wroth, or was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus. And so you see the perspective here of 12:17 of the dragon was angry, and because the dragon was angry, it went to make war. So the dragon is antagonistic toward the woman. It also says in Revelation chapter 12 that the dragon opened up his mouth and he spit out water or floods after the woman to cause her to be carried away of a flood. So there are a couple of perspectives that we see in terms of the dragon. In Revelation 12 and verse 13 again, quoted that he sought to persecute the woman that was brought forth the man-child. And then Revelation 12 verse 3 and 4, that the great red dragon drew his tail, and the third part of the heavens, of the stars of heaven, were cast down to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was with child and ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So let's put that together briefly, in that the dragon in Revelation is seeking to bring persecution to the woman, and is also seeking to use false teachings or false doctrines and so forth to advance itself. So when we start seeing this dragon then begin to work and to speak, then we would expect then, from the perspective of persecution and bringing those things to be able to kill, to be able to destroy, and to achieve its purposes. Jesus said in John 10 that the dragon or the devil cometh not but for to steal, but to kill, and to destroy. That's his purpose. And we see that again carried out in Revelation through that lens. His purpose is but to be able to steal, to kill, and to destroy. So Matthew chapter 24, and verse 15 and 20, it says these words. It says, "And when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and whoever reads, let him understand. And then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains, and let them which are on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither let it be on the Sabbath days." So we look at Matthew chapter 25 from the perspective of, it says that there will be an abomination that maketh desolation. And that this abomination to make of desolation, that when it's standing in the holy place, then that would be a marker for those that were in Jerusalem to be able to flee. All right, so whenever this took place, it was a sign for them to leave. Luke says, "So when ye therefore," rather Mark 13:14, "so when you shall see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, then let the reader understand." Again, the emphasis there, when it's standing somewhere that it should not be, right? This is on the outskirts or the outside of Jerusalem. When you see this abomination, these pagan standards, where they are somewhere where they ought not be, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Last one is in Luke 21 and verse 20 and 21. Luke says, "But when you shall see the Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that her desolation is near." Now, Matthew's talked about it being the abomination of desolation, surrounding on the outside. Mark said when you see it standing where it should not be. And now Luke just adds on to that, but we're talking about the same thing. Like this, the armies on the outside having these banners of symbolizing paganism and its encroachment upon Jerusalem. So when you see these things, then that would be the sign for those that were in Jerusalem to flee. It says, "Know that her destruction is near at hand. And let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the city get out, and let those who are in the country stay out of the city." Reading from the book Country Living's page 32. It says, "As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for flight to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation and the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us." So what are we doing here in terms of this paragraph? It's making a comparison between what took place in Jerusalem to what would take place in the end. The comparison is pretty straightforward. It says, "As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was a sign to those Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of the papacy and the promotion of a papal Sabbath in this decree will be the sign then for us." Okay? So then as we see then the papal Sabbath being exalted and kind of following the metaphor that was given in Matthew 24, when the papal Sabbath is exalted or put in the place where it should not be, it will then be time to leave the large cities, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes and secluded places amongst the mountains. So let's just quickly break that piece down. Our comparison is the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction that will fall. And it's a comparison between the siege that will take place in the end of the world and the destruction that will follow. How were the early Christians to be warned when it was time to be able to leave Jerusalem? Certainly they could leave beforehand. And those that were in positions and able, they would flee beforehand. But there were some who would not be able to flee beforehand. So when would they know that now is the time to get out before all hell breaks loose? They would look out and they would see on the outskirts of Jerusalem they would see it surrounded by armies, but that would be a precarious situation, because if Jerusalem is surrounded by armies, how are you going to flee? If all your sources of escape are encircled, how will you flee? Well, in the providence of Jehovah, it was in 66 that Cestus's armies first came to Jerusalem, and they surrounded it on the outside, and that was like the fulfillment of what Matthew 24 and Luke was talking about. So they pictured Jerusalem being surrounded, because the city it had its walls, so it was very easy to surround a city in those times. So they have it surrounded, and in 66, Cestus's armies are there, and they stay encamped for months, and they are hoping for the surrender of Jerusalem. During this time, of course, the people are unable to get food. They're unable to get new springs of water coming in. They're unable to get supplies. And so what happens to a city if it can't get those things to be able to survive? Sooner or later, it's going to give up. You have no food coming in. People can't eat. If people are sick and they can't be treated, death ensues. And so now they're beginning to suffer. And during this time period, Cestus's armies are withdrawn. And as they are withdrawn, then that creates the opportunity for the Christians who were inside to be able to leave out. Okay? So they leave out. And so they scatter, because they realize this is what the Messiah was talking about when he said Jerusalem being surrounded by her armies. When you see this pagan banner where it should not be, that's time for us to flee. So they left. And when they were gone, the zealots attacked the Romans, and they came back inside the city. And then in 70 AD, Titus sent his army back and demanded the surrender of the city. And the citizens of the city felt God is not going to suffer it to be destroyed. Just 4 years prior, he sent them running. He'll do the same thing. History records it was entirely different. But during this time, of course, they were unable to get out. They were unable to get supplies. The people began to starve inside the city. Death and famine increased, and eventually Titus's armies overran the city and destroyed it. But not one Christian perished, because they listened to the word that Jesus gave. Now here's the comparison. It says then, as the siege of the Jerusalem by the Roman armies was a sign to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation and the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath. And I think it's important to just be able to read. It states in that the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath, i.e., when you have then a Sunday law that is passed and it's enforced, then it is time to leave the large cities preparatory to leaving the smaller ones. It's important to distinguish that that's not saying people are talking about it, or there's the idea that it might be, but it's pretty plain that it is a comparison that when it is enforced, then that is the time to leave. Now, make no mistake about it. The opportunity to be able to move and to go into the country should be one that we should consider and plan and pray even now. Well, God, what do you want me to do? Select the Messages, Book 2, page 360. It says, more and more, as time advances, our people will have to leave the cities. For years, we have been instructed that our brothers and sisters, and especially families with children, should plan to leave the cities as the way opens before them to do so. So I think that puts things within its context. It gives us some framework. So we can know then that, all right, if we can, then go ahead and go. Particularly those in with families, with younger children. As the opportunity opens up and God makes his providence clear, follow in that way. Of course, don't go foolishly, don't go haphazardly, don't go without a plan, figuring, okay, I'm just going to go out here and God's going to take care of me. It is said that God takes care of fools and babies. So go with the plan, prayerfully considering doing so. And then on the alternative side, we also saw then in the book Country Living that then there would be the enforcement then of Sunday sacredness, meaning when you see Sunday exalted in the place of Sabbath, that will be the comparison, right? When it is enshrined and the laws say that you must obey Sunday as Sabbath, then you would know now is the time to flee. So where are we in relation to those things? Many look at the advancement in terms of technology, and particularly artificial intelligence or the AI, as that this is like the precursor, and this means that we are at the end. So if you go online and you do any type of search, whether you're TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, whatever you like to look at or will look at, just sites, and you are looking at questions, many will write and say, well, we're living in the end because of the increase in artificial technology. And because you have this increase in technology, that there are things that are taking place that are behind the scenes to prepare for the end. And so we look at this nefarious bot and the work that is being done. And of course, when we talk about the implementation of the mark of the beast in Revelation chapter 13, one of the areas there, it says, is that no man will be able to buy or sell unless you have the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So let's go back just for a moment in terms of some of the methodologies and the methods of currency or payment and so forth. Currency and versus payment. So you remember, you think about like payment, one of the things that people use today, and many of us use today to pay, credit cards, or debit cards. And so of course you can just take out a piece of plastic and pay for said item. Of course, you could always use cash. Think about cash being king. People accept it and still use. The other piece that probably is not as used as much are checks. Checks are just a method of being able to make payment. Now, again, I want to ask you then, of the ones we've looked at, if you recall, that some are payments and some are currency. So it's important to be able to just distinguish really quick. Currency is a medium of exchange for a good or service. So when we talk about currency, a credit card is not a currency, okay? That's not a currency, that's just a form of payment. A check is not a currency, it's just a form of a payment. Bartering is not a currency. Like a bartering might be, you do hair, someone has some sweet potatoes. And you might say, hey, I'll do your hair and you give me $80 worth of sweet potatoes. That's a barter. All right, you can do that because it's just an agreement between those entities, those parties to be able to have something. When what you have happening, of course, that we are familiar with, is most of us probably use some type of electronic payment method. Like whether it's, if I even probably say, well, who has cash on them today? Chances are probably most of you say, well, I don't have any cash, but I can get you some cash. You know, I got a bank card, I have this, or I have just my phone, I can go and get it because I don't use cash. So there are many who feel that a cashless society is important to be able to bring about the mark of the beast. Because you have to enforce people's behavior, and if you have a cashless society, then that means people don't have the freedom to go and to do transactions and so forth. So we're going to explore that myth. But I'm going to digress for just a moment and talk about something of digital currency. So you may have heard of cryptocurrency, right? A Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, those are private. That's not like a public thing. Those are private. And you have different terms that people may have for currency that people will buy in exchange, and you can use it. Like just the same as you can use gold. Now, you can't go with a block of gold to Target and say, I want to buy this piece of whatever, right? They're going to look at you like you're crazy. Like you need to go and exchange it for its dollars and bring back. We only accept dollar bills here. So just the same as you had a Bitcoin and you went in to try to exchange it, people would not buy it. Now, I read about one poor soul who had a hard drive that had Bitcoins on it that's valued, he feels, somewhere in the neighborhood of like $400 million. Poor soul lost it. His girlfriend dumped it in the trash. The ex-girlfriend dumped it in the trash. And he looked at the value of it, it's like, $500 million. And he's gone to court saying, look, I will pay if you let me exhume the trash. And the way most landfills work is that they have a sequence of, it's quadrant off to know, all right, we got the trash from this area on this day, and we put it over here. It's not like just throwing stuff out. It's organized. So we know that we got the trash from this day, from this part of town that's over here. So it's still like looking for a needle in a haystack, but not the same. You have at least a good hunch. And the municipalities, they went back and said, no, we're not going to let you come and dig. And I said, well, I'll pay you. Let me dig. I'll pay you the money. And the court so far have not sided with him. But imagine you have $500 million on a hard drive and you can't get it. You know, it's like life can be cruel, you know, very cruel. But that's a currency though, okay? Right? So imagine again if he could get that $500 million off of that cryptocurrency, then he would, in order to be used, because most places don't take cryptocurrency, you would have to exchange it to something else. Different way of thinking about it is if you have American dollars, you travel abroad, you might need to exchange those American dollars for the country that you're in, right? All right, so what they're saying is basically your dollars are what? Are useless. Because we can't conduct business in that. It has value, but for our purposes, it's useless. So we need to go in and get our dollars, and we'll be able to conduct business. So when we talk about currency, then currency is just like a medium of exchange. Okay, so the central banks in all countries have central banks, and the purpose of the central banks is multifaceted. Amongst them is to be able to control the level of inflation. To be able to make sure you're not going to a recession, and just to make sure the economy is kind of buzzing along. Now, of course, you probably heard some things with the current president and his disapproval of Jerome Powell as the chief of the Fed. But the central bank's job is to be able to kind of like make sure that the economy doesn't go too fast, make sure it doesn't go too slow. So it's like a brake and a gas pedal in a car. You really, optimally, you want to cruise down the street. Like if you're driving down the street, you keep hitting the brakes, that's a problem, right? And if you drive down the road and you just keep it floored, that's a problem. So you want to have like, if using the brake as you need it and using the gas as needed. So the central banks have looked at the idea then of, well, what if we also had a currency? So having a currency would mean the following. It would simply mean that in addition to, and for the U.S., the currency that we have is our $1 bill, $2 bill, 5, 10, so forth and so on, and coins, right? That's our currency. Now again, for payment, you can go into any store and you can give them a check and they'll take that as a payment. You give them a money order, they'll make certified funds, they'll take it as a payment. You can give them a gift card, they can take it as a payment, but that's not currency. So please understand the difference between what might be accepted as payment. It may not be currency. Currency is what's issued by the government or by the Fed. Okay, so for you're able to look into see various central banks and their either exploration in digital currency. And so the idea is that they're saying, look, because technology is advancing so much, our nation should have a digital currency. So then that one day, in addition to a physical dollar bill, you'll have a digital dollar bill that you can use. In addition to a $5 bill, you'll have a digital $5 bill that you can use as a form of currency. So you can see where the various countries were or are in that pursuit. That was back in 2001, and this was in, not 2001, 2021, and this is in 2022. And America is probably where we would be most interested in because we are in America. America is in that research phase of figuring out, well, how can we use and implement digital currency? President Biden had signed an executive order that would authorize being able to continue to explore. President Trump, he has written, basically reversed that executive order and said that we won't go forward with a digital currency. Now, of course, again, it's just a matter of time. Digital currency will come, we'll be able to use it. Well, what does it mean then as such? Because people see it as that would mean then the end of the world. Well, before I get there, let's look quickly at the evolution of currency. So on the far left, we can see like there's that physical piece. Like many days and bygone, people would go around with silver and gold. Okay, checks, of course, were an opportunity that people would use, and of course, you could use money orders, or you could use physical cash. But in the modern era, most people, of course, use some type of physical card. But beyond that, more people and more are using some type of digital payment, right? So you take out your Apple phone, use Apple Pay, Google Wallet, use some type of wallet like tap to pay device. You can even leave out and have a smart watch and just take your smart watch and pay for your purchase. You don't have to have like the physical card. You don't have to have the phone. Just have to have your watch, click it, boom, you pay for it. At Whole Foods, you can even go in, you've registered, and you can like swipe your palm to be able to pay for your food. So some people would be scared because like, hey, isn't that like the mark of the beast where they're like looking at your palm? Other places are putting on like facial technology to be able to use your face to pay for your purchases and so forth. So that's the process going there. I had I think the Girl Scouts came by maybe last year and they were selling something and hey, let's get some Girl Scout cookies. Well, it's time to pay. Old days, you may go find a check, go find cash, but now just take out your phone. They have like a little payment module, or you can do Zelle, or Venmo, or PayPal. All those different pieces. That's just digital. The transference means electronically. All right. So, what does that mean then again in respect of what we're talking about? Well, the concern that many people feel then is that if you can do these things digitally, then that means you're able to control individuals, right? And if you can control them, then you're able to influence what they're able to buy and what they're able to sell. Now, this didn't show up too well in terms of just like some of the lights backing out, but you have, of course, the fear then that behind is like the Illuminati. They're controlling all of these affairs. Somehow this ties into surveillance. The government will know what you're buying and what you are sending money over here for. They'll be able to control those things, and maybe we'll go into some type of manipulation and such. Well, how do we deal with that in context of the end? Will the government economy collapse? Because there are many people say, well, the economy is going to collapse. And so when they can put all these things together, they're going to pull the rug out from underneath you, and you will be left with holding nothing. So let's think about that just for a moment before we look into the scriptures for that. If for the economy to collapse, going by that idea, what would happen if the economy collapsed? Will people still be able to buy and sell? Yes, they'll still be able to buy and sell. So, well, hold it. How can you buy and sell if the economy collapses? You're able to buy and sell. You can still barter. You can still trade. Those are mechanisms of buying and selling. The emphasis on Revelation chapter 13 is not talking about like a digital currency. It's driving home a very important facet, not that the economy will collapse. So to shock or to pull the rug out from underneath, some folks will say, well, hey, you won't get the mark of the beast until you can have like the economy to collapse. And so when like 2008 took place and so forth, they say, hey, this will be the end. They have to use these things and so forth. No, Revelation is not talking about the idea of an economy collapsing. Revelation is speaking specifically to the idea that those who would follow the Lamb will be excluded from an environment of being able to, quote, buy and sell. So to the point that even bartering, if we would emphasize that, would not be acceptable because they don't fit the bill, you don't fit the bill. So think of it in terms of like going to the store, and if they state like no shoes, no shirt, no service. And if you don't have those things on, you don't get to procure their goods, right? But the next person that comes in, if they have those things, they get to procure the goods. The only thing that has changed is the person who is seeking to buy and to receive said goods in relation to the law. So it's important to keep in mind that in Revelation then it is not just categorically suggesting there will not be an economy at the end, and that's going to be like an economic collapse and ruin, but rather it is suggesting then that those who are impacted by a no buy, no sell are specifically those who are adhering to the command of God. So let's look at a couple of texts then that will speak and help us maybe to understand about buying and selling and so forth. In Luke chapter 17 and verse 28, Jesus said that, speaking about like the times of Lot and Noah, it says that they did eat, they drank, and they bought and they sold, until the time that Noah entered into the ark and the flood carried them away. So they were continuing able to process and to carry on life as normal. Even though the end was very near, the aspect of continuing to exchange was there. And of course, the comparison is to the last days, so that people will continue on in the normal function of affairs, even during the time of Revelation chapter 13, not aware that the end is near at hand. In Revelation chapter 18 and verse 3, those different places in Revelation 18, it says that the merchants of the earth, they waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Speaking then about this mystical Babylon, what it is suggesting, in fact, if we go to Revelation chapter 18, verse 3, just to clarify really quickly there, Revelation chapter 18 and verse 3, it is stating then that this Babylon, mystery Babylon, that she has made the merchants of the earth rich through the abundance of her delicacies, right? And it says that the Revelation 18:3, it says that the nations of the earth have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. The merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. All right, so is it saying then that she's like this commercial power that's in trading and things? That's not the point. The point that John is seeking to draw up, the whole condemnation about spiritual Babylon is just that. That is the spiritual abominations that she is practicing and exercising that is the source of her wealth. All right, so this is, again, metaphorically speaking. So in terms of doing these things that are transgressing and leading into the abomination of desolation, that the merchants of the earth are in support of her laws. They're in support of her teachings. They're in support of her stance in relation to this power of church and state being combined. And now something has happened, or that will happen, that will cause them to lose their power. In verse 11, it says, and the merchants of the earth will mourn, weep and mourn over her, for no one is able to buy their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls. So why are they not able to buy her merchandise anymore? Is it because it's like an economic collapse? Verse 9 says, the kings of the earth who committed fornication, they've lived luxuriously with her. They will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour thy judgment has come. In other words, they are not able to, quote, buy because Babylon has been destroyed. Not literally speaking, mind you. It is saying that the judgments of God have rested upon Babylon, and now no one is interested in her wares. No one is interested in her, the accumulation. And remember, it accuses her of fornication. It accuses her of seducing the kings of the earth. And so essentially, the gig is up. The gig is up. No one is seeking to following through her practices at that time. The merchants of the earth are waxed rich of the abundance of her delicacies. Daniel 11:43, it says that he will have power over the treasures of gold and silver. That's from Daniel 11 and verse 43. So that those texts indicate then that there'll still be gold and silver. There'll still be buying and selling. There'll still be commerce that will take place. But the distinction will be, but those who are following the Lamb and keeping the commandments of God, they will be excluded from buying or selling. Thus it will be that they have no support to be able to turn to, that every earthly support is cut off. But who will they turn to in this hour of extreme? They will turn to God. And God has promised your bread and your water shall be sure. I'll provide a table for you in the wilderness. Rivers in the desert will I see. All these promises, again, God confers, he fulfills. So these will exist unto the very end. Well, now what about this dragon talk to shift over? Where do we see the dragon talking? And remember I said that the dragon we see in Revelation is using, again, he will use deception and also will use persecution. Now this is from Chief Justice John Roberts. And the article it states that he has written 3 cases dissolving the separation of church and state. Now, that dissolving the separation of church and state is kind of hyperbole, all right, because church and state separation still exists. However, some of the framework is being challenged and being pushed. So that's the perspective there. So this is May the 1st, 2025. Notice what it says, and this is in a case that basically was dealing with the issue then of parochial schools having the ability to receive state funding. So you think of it this way. Every purchase that you make in the store and the taxes that you pay, they go to the state treasury. State treasury takes that money and is divvied up to various and sundry needs. So I believe it was in Missouri, they were looking at at giving funds to help refurbish playgrounds for schools. And so their parochial schools felt that they should also get some of the money to help refurbish their playgrounds, just as John Adams Academy would also get money to be able to refurbish their playgrounds. The challenge was, or the issue was, is that these are parochial or church schools. So can you give money from the state to the church school to help them to refurbish, and to build their playground? That was fundamentally the question. Now, if you think about it from one side, you say, well, look, I pay taxes and my children go to homeschool. My children go to a Adventist academy. My children go to another Christian school. So I'm paying all these taxes basically to send someone else's kids to the school because I'm not getting the benefit from that. I'm not deriving any benefit from that. It will make sense to me if I'm paying my taxes that my kids should get their allotment to be able to be used at their schools. Does that make sense? That's what the argument is. Like if I'm paying, I'm not getting any benefit from it. So send it over to the academy of my choice and let them get the benefit of it. Well, the issue, though, is the one we spoke about earlier, that there's a separation between church and separation between state. So let's ask the question a different way. Would you be cool then with a Buddhist church receiving money to be able to fix their playground? Would you be good with a Wiccan church receiving money to fix their playground? Would you be good with a Catholic church receiving money to be able to fix their playground? Would you be good with the Muslim church, synagogue, receiving money to fix their playground? And then when you start asking those questions, people start saying, no, I would not. And if you start answering, no, you wouldn't, then the reason what you would ask, well, why? Why wouldn't you? That would be religious discrimination. Okay? So the church and the state are then separate. So the church is over one side, the state is on one side, and such. Now, here's what the argument was that was there. It says, Winsley's case arises at the intersection of the First Amendment religious clause, which prohibits the government's establishment of religion and guarantees the free exercise thereof. Because again, if you are giving to one religion, you are officially establishing that religion. You're saying that it is sanctioned by the state. We're giving our blessing. But if you don't do it for another one, then you are also discriminating. But if you do it for any of them, again, you're establishing religion. And there's that free establishment clause that the Congress will not seek to establish any religion. It says in 2017, the court ruled that Missouri violated the free exercise clause by excluding the Trinity Lutheran Church's Child Learning Center from a grant program for playground resurfacing made from recycled tires, etc. In Trinity Lutheran and Espinosa, we held that the free exercise clause forbids discrimination on the basis of religious status, Roberts wrote, but those decisions never suggested that use-based discrimination is any less offensive to the free exercise clause. In other words, Roberts concluded that it would be okay for the school to be able to receive money. Now, of course, it did not end up going through because there just weren't enough votes. But the framework I'm just sharing, the sentiment is that some don't feel that church and state should be separate. This is from the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He penned a piece on X that is called The True Meaning of Separation of Church and State. And of course, then you will say, well, Mike Johnson is certainly one of the most powerful persons in the United States currently, and that he is the Speaker of the House. This is what he said in writing his piece. And of course, in the foreground was a picture of Thomas Jefferson. Here's what Mike Johnson said. He said, as a former constitutional law litigator, I, along with many of my former colleagues, have long argued that the Johnson Amendment is unconstitutional. Johnson Amendment more or less says that states or the church can't be a political machine and use its powers to be able to influence politics. It was brought about during the civil rights in many ways to be able to stymie blacks from being able to gain and to aspire political power. In the 60s, of course, the hub of many civil rights actions took place out of the churches. So the Johnson Amendment was to seek to sort of curtail that. He's arguing, saying that it's unconstitutional. President Trump understands this well, and in his speech to the 2017 National Prayer Breakfast, he resolved to get rid of all and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment and allow our representatives of faith to speak freely and without fear of retribution. Resolving the Texas case will be key to ensuring that people of faith are no longer censored and silenced because of the tax code, and hopefully it will serve as a teachable moment about one of the most misunderstood subjects in our culture. So quickly translating. The way the Johnson Amendment works is that if a church is to be found in breach of that, then they would lose their tax-exempt status. So so essentially then, the church would then have to pay taxes on tithes, offerings, incomes that are received. And so that has held some, quote, at bay. But he's saying that should not be the case because the church should be able to have influence here. He says, Jefferson clearly did not mean that metaphorical wall was to keep religion from influencing issues of civil government. To the contrary, it was meant to keep the federal government from impeding the religious practices of citizens. The founders wanted to protect the church from an encroaching state, not the other way around. So please grasp what he's saying. He's saying, look, I'm telling you what separation of church and state is. And in his opinion, he's stating it that the founders wanted to protect the church from the state, not the other way around. Or placing it simply, that there is no issue with the church and the state combining. He says, as we approach the 250th birthday of our great nation, well, let me not say combining, but for the church to be able to influence the state. As we approach the 250th birthday of our great nation, it has never been more important to defend truth on every front, to repair our foundations and to hold fast to who we are and what we stand for. Anyone who has been misled to believe that religious principles and viewpoints must be separated from public affairs should be reminded to review their history. That's his summation. His summation is, as Speaker of the House, that if you believe that church and state should be separated, then you have been misled and you should be reminded to look at history. His concluding sentence is, let us hope that the federal court in Texas accepts the IRS consent judgment as yet another acknowledgement of these essential truths. So our speaker certainly feels a different way. So where does that place us today? Well, Revelation chapter 7 says in verse 1 that after these things I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, and they were holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Beloved, there are many who then espouse in terms of the notion then of Christian nationalism, that it should be okay to let these things mix and play together. Students of history recognize and understand in the prophecy that when those two mingle and the dragon begins to speak, then persecution will happen. Well, what's holding it in place in all events? God says, don't let the winds blow until the servants of God have been sealed in their foreheads. And last day events, page 266. So could we men see with heavenly vision, they will behold companies of angels that excel in strength station about those who have kept the word of Christ's patience. With sympathizing tenderness, angels have witnessed their distress and have heard their prayers, and they are awaiting the word of their commander to snatch them from their peril, talking about in the end of the last days, that God will watch over and protect and keep his own. The precious Savior will send help just when we need it. That is his promise, that his church will be preserved. He will keep his own that have committed themselves to him by covenant and by sacrifice. Before we break, I do want to pray and give an opportunity for any questions that you might have. And then, of course, to let you go. So let's pray first. Father in heaven, I pray for your grace and for your spirit to be with us. We know that there are many who misunderstand these things and really feel that they're doing things that are good, that will be for the betterment of the nation. But we're going down the wrong pathway in doing so. We're seeking to allow those things to come in that ought not be. So I just pray that you would help them to be able to see, help us as well to be able to be awake and to give warning. And I pray as well that during the time in which you would draw us, that you may draw us to you. I pray that you would help us to make our salvation sure as the angels holding back the winds of strife. I pray that you would prepare us to be able to receive your eternal seal when the day comes in which men will not be able to buy or sell because of their allegiance to you. I would pray that you would help us all to be faithful to you, that we will not compromise our faith for a pot of stew, but that we will seek to hold fast to the eternal prize that you have offered and given to us through your Son. For it is in his name that we pray. Amen.